Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next conversation with Carra. My name is Gian-Carlo Carra. I have the amazing honor for the last 11 years of being the city councilor for the great neighborhoods of Ward 9, East Calgary. I am also your candidate for re-election in October 18 municipal election. I am running for re-election because I believe this is a critical moment in our city's history. It is a moment where we will either follow our last decade, the core industry, the last several decades, oil and gas, into a long and painful descent, or we will rise on our strengths as a great Western Canadian place to make a great Canadian life. And defining what that means and choosing to rise is really what these conversations are about. I believe that when we head to the polls, as Calgarians, we should be informed by hopeful stories, by thoughtful stories, by the challenges and the opportunities that lie before us. And today, after a series of really great conversations across the spectrum, we are tackling the conversation of food insecurity and urban agriculture. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. You will hear your municipal and politicians and your politicians from other orders of government and your community leaders start meetings in a good way with a land acknowledgement. And when we do that, what we're doing is we are rewriting the history of this place. We are re-acknowledging a better history, a more truthful history. And that is that the project of being Calgarians did not start 130 years ago with Euro-Canadian settlement. It actually started in time immemorial with very different people who came to this land and shared it. The Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot people, the Aye Nakota, the mountain people, the Stony Nakota people, the Tsuut'ina people, the Métis people with their long history on this land, and now urban Aboriginals from across Turtle Island, Euro-Canadians and now international Canadians from all over the world sharing this land together. And we acknowledge that we are signatories of this peace treaty that laid out a commitment to share this land together. And what we're talking about right here is one of the core functions of sharing land together, and that is how we actually live on the land and feed ourselves. And so without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce a really powerhouse group of Calgarians who are joining us today to talk about food insecurity and urban agriculture. I'm going to just give you their names, and then I'm going to turn it over to them to talk a little bit about themselves and, more importantly, the organizations they represent and the work that they do. And from there, we're going to get into a wide-ranging conversation about these things. So we have Renee McKillop, who is the interim CEO of Fresh Roots. We have Audra Stevenson, who's the interim CEO of Leftovers Foundation. We have Heather Ramshaw and Jeremy Zoller from a very cool Ward 9 entity, the Highfield Regenerative Farm, and they're going to talk about what they're doing on the land there. We have Saima Habib, who is project manager at Community Food Centers Canada and is actually working on a really cool project, East Calgary project called the Rooted Youth Farming Project. And I don't believe I'm missing anyone. I believe that's everyone. So in no particular order, and without further ado, Renee, do you want to talk to us about the work that Fresh Roots does, how you got to here, and its role in the conversation we're having today about food insecurity and urban agriculture?
Sure. Yeah, I have had the privilege of joining Fresh Roots over the past 6 months. And it's a nonprofit, a local nonprofit social enterprise, and we operate mobile grocery stores. So that means we use big trucks or a decommissioned city transit bus that we've retrofitted into a mobile grocery store that takes fresh food right to the communities who are facing barriers to accessing either culturally appropriate food or fresh, healthy food, and might be facing barriers either financially or geographically in accessing food for their families. And so Fresh Roots is a very cool organization. We're fairly new. And it really kind of came out of the feedback from community members, especially people who have experienced food insecurity, saying we need to make sure everyone in Calgary has access to fresh, healthy food in a dignified way. And often that means culturally appropriate food too. And I'm proud to be a part of Fresh Roots because it does provide a new solution to food insecurity in Calgary. It's not the whole solution, of course, because food insecurity is a very complex issue. But it is a very community-minded approach where it's kind of shopping at a market for healthy food that people can take home to their families and having choice in that, and paying prices that are affordable based on their tight budget. So that's a little bit about me and Fresh Roots. I've had the pleasure of working in kind of food security work in Calgary over the past few years. And so when I learned about Fresh Roots and the work that they're doing, I was very excited to become a part of it, and happy to be here to talk to my fellow colleagues in food security work in Calgary.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Renee. Let's go over to Audra and talk about the Leftovers Foundation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I got to join the Leftovers team 6 weeks before COVID started, which was very exciting and interesting work. So Leftovers is a tech-enabled charity. And so our goal is really about mobilizing community to get involved in food systems. And that's through a variety of ways. Our core programming is around rescuing food. So working with local cafes and grocery stores to donate delicious edible food and delivering that to local nonprofits and charities. But we've also started expanding into harvesting some urban backyard gardens. And we're opening a pay what you want grocery store pilot in the fall here. So we're really looking at kind of what are the most innovative, interesting, unique ways that we can start getting people excited about being involved in solving some of these larger food system problems. Because, you know, all of us on this call are not going to solve it on our own. We need everybody to get involved and be part of the solution. And I should say we have an incredible base of over 300 volunteers across 5 cities that deliver food. They, pick their neighbors' apples from their apple tree and, do a variety of things to keep kind of leftovers going. So we're really community led. And it's been a total privilege to be involved. And yeah, that's Leftovers.
Thank you, Audra. Why don't we go to our Highfield Community Farm folks? So we have Heather, who's the operations manager, and Jeremy, who's one of the co-farmers. I know that Heather might be having some internet problems, so if she drops in and out, we'll roll with that. This is the age of Zoom. Turning it over to you, amazing people.
Thank you. Heather, you can go. Okay, good.
Yeah, I can hear people. If I cut out, then just put in the chat and Jeremy will continue on for me. So apologies. So I'm the operations manager at Highfields Farm. It's a new-ish urban agriculture community farm hub project with the city and the Compost Council of Canada. So we are taking a 15-acre property of a City of Calgary Roads property and transforming it into an active farm space. And we're based in 3 pillars of land revitalization, nutrient dense regenerative food, and community building. So the entire farm is run, it's community driven. So this year we have a 1/4 acre of gardens going, completely maintained by volunteers. And all of our food is directed to food access organizations. So we've donated, I think it's been around 500 pounds of produce so far to the food bank and the mustard seed. And I know we have some exciting opportunities, hopefully upcoming with the Leftovers crew and their affordable grocery store. And yeah, that's the farm. Jeremy, do you want to speak a little bit more to it?
What's really interesting about this project is that we're really focusing on education for the local community, and also direct farm to table. So people will come and learn about growing nutrient dense food, about what that means with really quality soils. And it's really local. Like, we're right in the heart of Highfield. And then we are hoping to give donations to all the food insecurity organizations across the city. But right now, the food bank and the mustard seed are the closest. And so they're until we get a cooler up and running, they're kind of getting our first donation. So it's just exciting for us to be able to have an urban farm in the city itself.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. And last, but certainly not least, Saima Habib, talk to us about the national scope of what you're doing, and also this new project in East Calgary called Rooted.
Yeah, thank you. And just a note that, I have the pleasure of working with so many people in this call. And I think that's what's so powerful about Calgary's food work, is it's very interconnected and grounded in relationships. And that's really neat. It's really special about this city, is there's a real sense of collaboration. So I work for Community Food Centers Canada. I manage a national program that focuses on chronic disease prevention and management in people who are living on low incomes. And personally, I'm really interested in the divide that occurs between people experiencing poverty and access to nutritious food, and how those seem to be nutritious, good local food, and how those two worlds sort of seem to be disconnected from each other. And solutions often kind of to those problems are grounded in a charitable approach, which is amazing, because people definitely need access to food. But what I'm curious about is how we bridge the worlds of that experience of poverty and often the health outcomes that occur as a result of living in poverty. How do we bridge that with the world of, amazing food access and being a foodie and being able to like taste fresh eggplants from the garden, or, being able to participate in the robust food world that Calgary has. And so from that, I have a lot of experience in the food world in Calgary as well. I worked alongside Renee at the Alex Community Food Center. And part of what I did was a lot of youth work. And what's really amazing about working with youth is that there's a lot of curiosity and like joy around gardens and growing food. And so I just have become very curious about what it might look like to start a farming space that focuses on racialized and low-income youth, and focus on food production and building connection to land. So currently we're prototyping a lot of what we're doing at the Land of Dreams, which is an urban agriculture project on the east end of the city. I'm not sure if it quite falls within Ward 9. It might be like
just to the south of Ward 9.
Yeah, but we're doing some work there and testing and prototyping programming with the intention, thanks to a lot of support from the Ward 9 office, with the intention to eventually move more inward and start to work in spaces that are more accessible for youth, where they can access some kind of community garden or farming that is more central, and also with the intention of kind of teaching entrepreneurship and skills around not just the farming part of things, but the selling part of things. So big vision, big dream, definitely in the beginning stages, but very grateful to be working kind of in the Calgary landscape.
So I guess my first question to everybody, and I think we've got a lot of people watching, and I think a lot of people who sign up to listen to people who are experts in food insecurity and urban agriculture talk about these things, is there's a lot of insider knowledge. And in the event that there are people who are watching who are not already plugged into the challenges that we're facing, do we want to offer some broad-based descriptions of what food insecurity is, and how much of a challenge is it for Calgarians? And obviously all of your organizations have risen up because this is a challenge and you're rising up to address that challenge. maybe you can give us some like real insight into as Simon said, the divide here. Who wants to jump in?
I'm happy to jump in as like the biggest outsider. I would say I only joined the food space, a year and a half ago. And it's been an incredible learning journey. And I'm sure people will correct me if I get something wrong. Food insecurity is just whether or not people know where their next meal is coming from. And it kind of it ranges in severity of, how often that's happening to you. But I think post-COVID, it's 1 in 7 families across Canada are experiencing food insecurity, meaning they don't know how they're going to put food on their table for their family that day. And I definitely before had no idea how intense the problem was, especially in a city like Calgary, where I feel like we have such a, high livability and we're winning these awards. And then there's kind of this underbelly of a gap in resources. And, I think one of the biggest learnings for me over the last year is that the first and foremost, it's an income issue. So even though all of us are working really hard to redistribute resources and food to people, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a lack of financial resources to purchase food. Food is often the first thing that gets compromised in a budget for families. And I think that's where a lot of what Simon's talking about goes on, where, okay, so we're sacrificing, a lot of maybe it's nutrition or quality or kind of these, they shouldn't be luxuries, but they're sometimes considered luxuries when you're having to cut down your food budget. And so when it's 1 in 7 people, it's not just like this segregated population that you don't encounter. It's the neighbors that you have, it's your siblings, it's sometimes your parents, it's seniors. It's really something that is kind of hidden. But I guarantee everybody who's watching knows somebody who is food insecure. That's my spiel. Anyone want to add?
I'm so glad you went for it, Audra. I think that was so perfectly said, and it is a surprise to so many when we live our lives in Calgary and sometimes don't realize how many people do struggle with what is a basic human right. We forget that this is a basic human right, access to food. And so I think the only thing I wanted to add to that is just that for so long we have focused on redistributing food to kind of meet this need, but really understanding that it comes down to temporary jobs or low paying jobs or systemic inequalities that are putting people in situations where they have to make these impossible choices between paying rent or eating or skipping a meal for their kids to eat. And so it's something to keep top of mind in our work. And I think the pandemic has really increase the amount of people who understand that, because we've gone through so many job losses in such an economic hard time that more and more people do understand food insecurity. And I think, it's important to understand the problem and important to focus on all the solutions that we're going to talk about today too. But the only other thing I wanted to just make a note of is that so many people, like you're saying, Audra, it's hidden in that we know like 3 out of 4 households who are food insecure won't even access the resources that are available because of stigma or health concerns or the ability to get to those places. And so this is a bigger problem than we realize, that it's compounded, like Simon was saying, with a health crisis and so forth. So it's important to acknowledge the complexity and the enormity of this issue that we're trying to tackle. And that's why, like Simon said, it takes all of us collaborating and working together.
Does anyone else want to add anything, or can we, thank you for that excellent overview of what food insecurity is. The other part of this conversation is, of course, urban agriculture. And I think we're poised to sort of bridge the gap and step into that part of the conversation. But I'll offer a couple of just personal reflections for a moment, and then ask my next question. And the first is that I've been door knocking Ward 9, and I've had the opportunity to spend some time with my 81-year-old mom and her 80-year-old best friend who grew up in East Calgary neighborhoods in the 40s and 50s and survived and thrived because of their family's ability to produce enough food to eat on the land that they inhabited. And, my mind reels at the fact that I couldn't do that. And so many of us couldn't do that. And so like the simple ability to provide for ourselves, which is only a generation ago, has sort of been lost. And my practice in sustainable urban design for 10 years was deeply tied into regionalism as a project. And, one of my favorite quotes from the mid 2000s is from, a guy named James Howard Kunstler, who suggested that the age of the 3,000-mile Caesar salad is drawing to a close, and that we have to get back to the project of feeding ourselves and knowing how to feed ourselves on a much more local basis. And so food insecurity is a huge issue, and it shouldn't be. And we have lost generational knowledge about how to feed that. And that's, I think, which takes us into the conversation about urban agriculture and scaling that appropriately and developing those skills, especially amongst people who don't have it. So we can talk about that. And I also want to talk about the role of your city government and the role of regional governments. And what is the role of government in that? So I'll throw it up. Let's talk about urban agriculture as a solution. And then if you want to start getting into the conversation about what the city's doing well to help and what the city needs to do, we can get into that also. So someone from Highfield want to jump in on this, or do we just want to get regulated on by SIMA to start?
No, I'm happy to comment there. Yeah, so we've been given this amazing opportunity to transform this piece of land that has been sitting basically vacant for nearly a decade. And I think that already kind of speaks to how people view urban agriculture, that there was a piece of land that's sat vacant for 10 years. And there's many of pieces like this across the city that have a lot of potential to become productive farms and be a piece of the local food system solution and getting local, fresh, whole foods into the hands of the people who live in the area. So for a long time, cities were just a place for industry and all about urbanization. And now we're realizing if we continue to eat up the farmland around the cities, then how are we going to feed the people in the cities? So it's been a nice, an interesting shift to watch Calgary move in that direction and supporting projects like this one. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for it to grow. And that's one thing that we're looking at kind of encouraging with Highfield Farm is by building this community of urban farmers. So what we've found that the experience of most urban farmers is that they feel sort of isolated. Like you're working maybe on a private piece of land, or you're having to commute in and out of the city to kind of a bigger piece that's on the outskirts, and everyone kind of feels like they're going it alone. So by building a community of urban farmers and kind of making those connections and collaborating on projects like Highfield Farm, we can hopefully bring urban agriculture to, show people what it even is and that it is possible, and that in a situation like Highfield, hopefully we can show not only other people that urban farming is possible on a bigger scale, but that you can, if with a little bit of space, you can also grow some of your own food and kind of hopefully improve the food sovereignty of your own household. So, and I know that comes with privilege of time and space to maintain something like that as well. But yeah, hopefully with just having urban agriculture being encouraged and more visible in the city, then hopefully that will kind of trigger people to think a little bit more about where the food's coming from and maybe take some action in their own lives or in the urban agriculture industry and kind of become a part of that. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on the role of urban agriculture? I'm not sure if we still have him. There he is.
You for sure. So I think a big part of this whole puzzle is about the lack of knowledge based on, we've lost a lot of knowledge between the last couple generations. My Oma and Opa had a huge garden. My grandma and grandpa, right, had a big garden in their yard. They used to work on the farm. I've even heard that the reason we have summer vacation for kids is so that the kids could come home and help the farm out a little bit more. But then, we skipped a generation. My parents wanted nothing to do with it. And now my generation is getting back into growing food again. And we have a lot of unused space in the city, not just for urban farming, but also for like backyard gardening. We're going to have to switch. We're starting to get droughts. We're going to have to switch from that grass system into a food system to be able to supplement some of these high cost veggies and help feed the family. So one of the big things at Highfield Farm that we have been focusing on is building a model to make it easier for more pieces of land to be activated and to be sustainable and regenerative financially as well as with the food, so that we aren't just always looking for kind of a handout or grants or whatever to fund these things. We also need to make these urban farmers and these smaller businesses profitable so that we can actually get this happening more often sustainably. So that's the big one. And then the other one is education. So teaching and supporting the local food production people in the city, the gardeners, the urban farmers, people that want to learn about what it takes to grow food, and really right down to the soil, learning about how important living soil and that biological piece of the soil to be able to grow that nutrient in the food that will give us the health that we need. So I think that, we have nutrition, we have knowledge, and then we have this community. It's all super important. It can fill in all the gaps, I think. So
I think, yeah, great points, everybody. My mission for my first couple of years on council was to really sort of remove the barriers. And, I guess I have questions as to whether we sufficiently removed them, but it's always seemed to me like the biggest gap we face is the knowledge gap. I mean, I'm privileged enough to have traveled in many parts of the world, and, what is burned into my mind as I whip past countryside on trains in different parts of the world is how extensively farmed every scrap of land surrounding railroads around the world is, except for here. And so I think that developing a new generation of urban farmers is absolutely job number one, to address food insecurity, to address economic opportunities, to sort of combat climate change also, and not require such energy intense food systems. Saima, you got to weigh in because I know you got a lot to say.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. So I guess just fundamentally, of course, there's a relationship with the land when it comes to farming, which is so valuable, and relationships with each other. And I think that that's what's so beautiful about community farming and farming that sort of happens within a city, is that it's typically done in the context of relationship, which fosters belonging. Again, going back to sort of this idea that if we're working with communities that are traditionally marginalized or experiencing poverty, that belonging and isolation are like a lack of belonging and a higher level of isolation are typically common amongst communities that are experiencing poverty. So just from that perspective alone, of just moments to connect with the land and with each other is super valuable. But beyond that, I think what's really fascinating is when I hear this sort of loss of skill amongst our generation, which I agree with. I'm thinking about the land of dreams a lot, because that space is a space where there's actually a huge amount of skill that's not tapped into. And there's one story in particular that really stands out to me, which was that the Congolese women who farm there, because it's a farming project where there are a lot of different refugee communities accessing land and growing on the land, is that I learned from the Congolese women that you can use squash leaves, like the squash leaves are edible and actually quite tasty. And so we do, amongst the community that we live in, there's a lot of knowledge that is not being utilized. And it's really powerful, just the different kinds of wisdom that we could maybe learn from communities that have experienced drought in their home countries, or know how to manage water in different ways. We also, I can't speak with full confidence about this because I don't know the inner workings, but I know that we've, with water problems because of how hot it has been this summer, the Yazidi women have a lot of wisdom about how to farm when there's not a lot of water. And so I think that there is an untapped resource that we are perhaps overlooking because we don't know how to connect with those communities in ways that are meaningful. And then I think, when it comes to the urban agriculture conversation, there was a great article in the Sprawl a few months ago about where, not necessarily urban farms, but community gardens and where those are located in the city. And that they're, disproportionately in the Southwest and Northwest, and maybe not so much located in the Northeast. And that kind of brings up questions about, well, who farms and what is the deal with access to land or knowledge gaps or barriers in terms of land access, and how can we sort of work to mitigate some of those barriers? And I think that might also kind of speak to your questions, Councillor Carra, about some of the work that the city has to do. But those are kind of some preliminary thoughts around urban agriculture, and particularly in respect to, again, urban agriculture as it pertains to communities that maybe typically don't have access to that sort of work.
Anyone want to jump in on that? Or can I throw another sort of nugget into the pot here? Because I guess the question is, what could our city government be doing better? We've certainly facilitated fresh routes. We've certainly, the Highfield Regenerative Farm is one of the major sort of pilot initiatives coming out of our food program that I was, proud to champion. And we do recognize that we need to sort of build the roster of urban farmers and people who know how to urban farm and do that as part of community and part of all of that. What else do you think the city could be doing? Because I guess one of the things that stuck in my mind over the last several years as we worked on this project is the fact that there is no real order of government that is, takes direct responsibility for food security. And are we doing enough? What could we be doing? Throw it out there for anybody who wants to tackle that one.
I have some thoughts. As part of my role at Leftovers, I get the privilege of connecting with a lot of organizations, especially in the emergency food services space. And everyone is kind of the feedback that I've been hearing is that in the community as a whole, and beyond emergency food services across the whole food system, there is this kind of underlying shift from going how do we band-aid the solutions? How do we fill this immediate need that is a total black hole of resources? And it's shifting from that being the only focus to also bringing focus to these longer term kind of systems change conversations. And my understanding is this is an exciting time in Calgary because these conversations are happening more frequently between larger groups. And that's just not happened before. And there's a lot of movement behind it. Paired with those conversations is also that there isn't a clear leader of that movement and of that change. Should it be the food bank? Should it be the mustard seed? Is it these large charities? And I kind of don't think it should be, because we want to move beyond this is a charitable sector issue. It's a whole food systems issue. And so I see that as an opportunity for the city of Calgary to play a way more prominent role around like leading that change and that movement, because coordinating all these people who really want to do good work is like a whole other job. And everyone in all these different organizations is doing it off the side of their desk. So I kind of think of that as like a gap that could have some really interesting solutions. Now, I don't necessarily think it has to be the city of Calgary, but I think that's a really interesting space to be a part of. And I would just love to give Nancy Dick from City of Calgary a shout out, because she runs the emergency food services group off the side of her desk, outside of her full job as a social worker. So yeah.
Renee, I see you're unmuted. Did you unmute because you want to jump in on this?
Sure, I could. Sorry, I was unmuted. I'm still catching up to the Zoom age. I think that it's a really interesting point that you bring up, Councillor Carra, because it's such a shame that food gets lost. You know, it's not on any municipal, provincial, federal necessarily, or within any one ministry. And that's a bit of a challenge to food work, and in that it is so many things. There are so many sides to food work, but that's also what's so exciting about it, is that when we talk about food, we're talking about community and culture and health and environment and livability, all these things at one time. But then that also can be kind of the overwhelm of it. And so thinking about the municipal role in food work, it really is an entrepreneurial space for municipalities. And I don't think that there's any obligation or necessarily precedent for municipalities to be involved, but it's a choice, like you kind of opened our conversation with, of like, what do we want? What kind of city do we want Calgary to be? We were always at a crossroads of making that choice around the future of our city. And I think food is one of those opportunities where no, it's not a traditional responsibility or role necessarily, but there's so many benefits to the work that you have already championed, and we've already seen so much great like new initiatives and energy and collaboration in the city with all these new initiatives that have started, and that takes political championship, I think, to help those initiatives to get off the ground. But there's always more that we can be doing, but it's hard because I think it is a little bit sometimes leading the way, where sometimes it could be said, well, is there a role for the city there? And at the very least, I think it is just reducing the barriers and championing projects. And I don't know, I guess in my experience over the last decade or so, there has been a lot of great progress. And so we're going in the right direction. It's just about stepping back once in a while and acknowledging like how many great things are happening, and what a great landscape Calgary is to work in food security and urban agricultural work, and how to keep building on that success from a positive place. So I think, like, in a lot of ways, and Councillor Carra, you've been a leader in that, in recognizing that urban agriculture is connected to food security, but it also just makes our communities more enjoyable to live in, and it makes this a city that people want to, are proud to be from. So all that stuff matters, and it all adds up. It's just that it's so it's such a diverse and all-encompassing topic when we crack this open.
I find in government that when you've got a topic that sort of sits at the intersection of so many different things, the danger is that if it's everyone's problem, it's no one's problem. And then it sort of gets slipped by. I got so much to sort of say, but I guess an observation I want to share is I'm a foodie. I watch, I've spent big chunks of my life going down the food channel wormholes and stuff like that. And I always think about a Canadian celebrity chef, Lynn Crawford, had a show for many years called Pitching In, where she goes to different farms in North America and gets basically her ass handed to her trying to produce whatever product is being produced on that particular farm, like whether it's ducks or cranberries or whatever. And then at the end of the show, she, as a celebrity chef, produces food for the farmers who kick their ass, and she shows them how their food can be made into beautiful food. And it always struck me like, imagine going to Italy or any other place with a deep sense of agriculture and try and teach a farmer how to cook the food that they produce. And they're not going to be like, you're going to be learning from them, not the other way around. And I think that there's a huge gap between a North American agribusiness model where people are disconnected from the culture of food and an agricultural environment where the culture and the food and the production of those two things are deeply intertwined. And so does anyone want to jump in and talk about that? Because I think that the conversation about food, agribusiness versus agriculture, the conversation regarding climate change, and the conversation regarding emerging technologies are all really sort of interesting questions as we seek food security at a regional scale. Because I think that the region is the animal that is human civilization, and the region is defined by the food shed, really, as much as the air shed and the water shed and a common culture. So throwing that out there, anyone want to jump in?
I kind of expected Jeremy to jump right on that. Oh, yeah. I have a lot of thoughts around just like you're saying, this agribusiness model and how we're all just completely disconnected. We see that at the farm quite a bit with, it's cool. We have our volunteers are a huge group of people. Some of them are folks who have been gardening for 20 years and they're like, oh, I'm so excited to come and learn. And I'm just like, oh, you have a lot I could learn from you, actually. And then we have people who have never seen a carrot grow and are just really excited to be there. And they ask so many questions and kind of connecting those two different groups of people and watching them, like it's a natural, like the one takes on this natural kind of teacher's position and the other one learns. And it's really cool to see that like happening right in front of you. Yeah, I used to manage the farmers market over at Hillhurst Sunnyside as well. And just there's very much a disconnect between people, like you're saying with Lynn Crawford's show. She's even a chef and she didn't have she had this idea of maybe what farming was, but then she would go there and it was completely different and it's so much more difficult than she expected. And I think that is a very common experience for especially people in an urban environment. And there's just this lack of appreciation for what farming truly is and how much resources and knowledge and care and time it actually takes to grow the food that you have to eat. And we would see it at the market all the time with people just, you'd overhear people's conversations and they're scoffing at the price of the tomatoes. And it's, they're like, oh, we'll just go to the grocery store and buy them. And there maybe they're $1 more for a tomato, but it's a tomato you're getting from a farm that's an hour and a half outside of the city who is paying their people proper wages and not spraying their crops as much as they can avoid it. And instead, people with it, because of the lack of education and the lack of, just knowledge around what it actually takes to make that, to produce that, they're totally happy to just get something from the grocery store that is maybe imported from Mexico and, who knows what kind of processes they're using to grow over there. I'd really love to hear, Jeremy, if you feel comfortable talking agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and kind of the climate side of this conversation, because I think you have a really good grasp on that.
Oh, hello.
Jeremy, are you here? You look like you're muted. Love to hear from you. You're muted, Jeremy.
There we go. I have my phone here. I'm at the farm, so it's a little windy. The big thing that I have realized starting to grow a little bit more food more commercially is that the sheer volume of food needed to feed our population is staggering. So, you know, there's a number of farms close to the city that support some of the local grocery stores, but it's really a drop in the bucket. We really need like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these sites everywhere to be able to meet the local need. And I think that's another piece that we have to think about. So it's great. Like we almost have to think about, it's going to take some time to transition to this local food, a local agriculture, urban food thing, which is super important. I think it's very important, back to that education piece, to make sure that people understand where their food comes from. Maybe even regionally, like, what are you eating? Are you eating avocados on the regular when maybe that's not the best food that we should be eating, because it takes so much energy to get those to our homes and to our grocery stores? And just tackling the food system that we already have, which isn't really about nutrients. It's more about access and cost. So, you know, that $1 tomato versus the $5 tomato at the farmer's market is something that we need to educate people about, why it's so important to eat that food that has a bit more nutrient in it, that's grown locally with love, less energy and less transport and less fuels. So it's we definitely have a bit of a slope to climb, but I see every day more and more people getting interested in wanting to take action towards this. And so I think now is the time, and I'm very excited to be a part of this panel with you guys, because everybody on this panel has been in the food game for so long. I'm relatively new, really, but I really feel education is maybe the number one way that we can get involved.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, I have to say, and I'm sort of thinking back to, you know, when I started in 2010 and we started, you know, actually bringing municipal government and the regional conversation into play. I'm not sure we would have been able to sort of assemble such an expert panel of people who are so deep into the work. So I also feel like we've got a massive slope to climb. The scaling of it all is daunting. But it's engaged now, and it's engaged with good people doing good work cross-sectorally and in an integrated way. We're running out of time, unfortunately. So maybe what I could do is tap each of you to just offer some closing thoughts and maybe some challenges to me and to your municipal government, and on a move forward basis. And we'll just say that this is the start of a great and important conversation, and I just want to thank you for your participation in it. Renee, throwing it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been so nice to be part of the conversation. I think some closing thoughts is, you know, just coming back to the name of our talk today, food insecurity and urban agriculture. There, and we've talked about, there's a connection to make there between people who are living in poverty and don't have access to enough food or good food or culturally appropriate food. As we started out, this is a real problem in Calgary, and then the wonderful work that they're doing at Highfield Farm and building up urban agriculture and making that accessible to more people and more Calgarians. I think bridging that is really important. At the same time, we can't forget that we don't necessarily need to go back to the way things were. You know, we need to go forward, and all scales of farming and agriculture are going to be important in our future to feed ourselves. So everything from large, medium family farms, regional, to the super micro urban container farm, it's all important. And so that is not kind of this antagonistic thing, but how do we all move forward together in that? And so that's just something that kind of came to mind. And lastly, like, the challenge to the city and to our councillors is that while building the urban agricultural movement in Calgary has been successful, and a lot of credit to Councillor Carra for that over the last decade, how much more we've seen great people doing really great things in growing food for our city. We have to remember that the commodification of food has really created a situation where it's really about income, so that people can work jobs where they can afford food for their families and have the time to go and participate in a community garden in the evening, not working 2 jobs or precarious work. And so those government policies are really the systemic change that we need to see, so that there's affordable childcare and living wage and basic income, and these tax benefits, because we're doing the work on the ground here to really kind of meet the immediate need and build a future. But those big policy changes, that's where the real change takes place, so that everybody in Calgary can participate in these wonderful projects, whether it's volunteering to rescue food, or shopping at farmers markets, or being involved in a community garden and urban agriculture. That's the place we want to get everybody to, so that we can all participate equally in this great city, in the community. But right now, we know that there's too many people that are struggling with the basic needs to even have that option. So a great conversation. Is so nice to talk about, kind of like we were saying, the whole breadth of the subject, and just thanks for having me here. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Renee. Audra, do you want to jump in with some closing remarks?
Yeah, sure. I love everything that Renee just said, and I might just tag on to it a bit. Of in my previous life in the tech sector, there's this concept called end-to-end ownership. And I think it's a really cool concept to bring over to something like food systems, where the idea would be that producers care about the products and what happens to it all through the value chain, all the way through to someone eating that carrot in their kitchen at home, and that across every piece of the system. So having retailers care equally about people having access to their food as much as they care about their business model. And so I think the thing that it makes me very excited about things like today and the different groups that are popping up to work together across these kind of silos is just even coming together under a common goal of like addressing some of these issues is beyond exciting to me, because I think it sounds like it's been a long time coming for everyone to come together and be like, yeah, we want to fix things and we want to change things and we want to work together. And I think like that's really like how you make things 1% better every day. That's always my goal, is like, how can we make things 1% better? Because it's big. When we, like Renee said, when we start looking at food systems, we start seeing, and then there's issues with childcare, and there's issues with poverty, and there's issues with racial inequality. And so, we just need to get everybody under the common goal, moving 1% forward. Yeah.
That's rad, Audra. Our Highfield Community Regenerative Farm folks, Heather, Jeremy, closing remarks?
Just thank you so much for having us on here. We're super honored to be part of this group of people, because this food community in Calgary is so amazing, and all of these people are working so hard to make change, and we're just super happy to be kind of this simple part of it, of actually playing around in the dirt, and hopefully some people want to join us. I know we're really short on time, so I'll leave it at that, but thank you so much for having us.
That's awesome. Jeremy, do you want to add, or do you just want to leave your mic drop from your last statement?
Yeah, I'll just say, anybody listening, if you want to make any kind of impact, just get involved. Start digging in the soil, plant some seeds, just start in a little pot if you have to. It's the best way to start getting in touch with that soil and your own food, and take ownership of that.
Saima, take us home.
Yeah, just the same thing as everybody else. And then a thank you. And finally, just that reforming our food system isn't just about the food system. It's about transforming people's health, changing our attitude towards poverty and what it does to people's health and what it does to people's access to food, like when we change how people access food and the level of stress they have about the choices that they have to make, the impossible choices, as Renee framed it, around their food consumption, we begin to change their health. As soon as people have access to food without stress and access to the sort of their basic needs without that high level of stress, their ability to contribute and be a part of a community and belong to a community changes. And that's really important when you're trying to create a healthy and vibrant city where everybody gets to participate. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I mean, again, I just want to say it's amazing to have such plugged in and thoughtful practitioners really improving, taking us up that very steep slope of transformation. I want to note again that I really think that this is a critical election for our city. I think there are groups that are committed to taking us back to a status quo and to an imagined past that never really existed. And it's really important that every Calgarian goes to the ballot box this October with a best future in mind for our city and a collaborative sort of vision for how we rise together. And I get passionate about this conversation because it's so critical to the project of civilization and how Calgary has a role to play as an inclusive and thriving and resilient place and a leader really in an increasingly unstable world. So thank you for the work that you do. I look forward to working with you. Everyone who's watching, get passionate about food. Get your kids passionate about food. They love it. They love it. And let's get out there and dig in the dirt and support these great organizations. Without further ado, that concludes this conversation with Carra. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.